of the most knowledgeable people on Warminster 2015 and the Warminster theme, because he's the organiser of the event. Will you please put your hands together and give a massive welcome for Kevin Goodman.
Right. Well, good morning, everyone. Not a drop has touched my lips yet, either. Right, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. I warn you now, this may be a slightly disjointed talk as I'm completely Warminstered out. I have literally about 10 minutes ago come back from the Waitrose car park talking to Radio 4. Deep joy. And unfortunately, my main adversary was the other person on the interview, who's Dr. David Clark. Oh, you know him well. You know him well. No, it went okay. I basically gave as good as I got. So it was the usual story of it was all the military, it was all a load of bunkum. No, it bloody well wasn't. Right, as I say, welcome to Talk Warminster 2015. I will also like to publicly thank our hosts at the Bell for the marvellous event that they've helped us to put on. So later on, perhaps at the end of the day, you'd like to give them a round of applause. Right, let's start. Warminster. Now this is where technology always lets me down.
The work? No,
The down one. Now it goes. Right. You see, I told you, technology and me, just do not mix. Okay, Warminster, as you probably know, is probably Britain's longest UFO flat. 15 years old, from 1965 through to about 1980. Now it all started Christmas Day 1964 when Marjorie Bye was walking up to one of the churches to go to service and was assailed by strange noises. Now if any of you have read Arthur Shuttleworth's book, you will know that the prose is somewhat racy, in that she was assailed by sonic fingers of sound which pinned her to the floor and left her weak-kneed and numb. What you can see on the screen here is actually the press cutting from the Warminster Journal of around that time, and I will just briefly quote the very bottom line. Right, basically it says that it was a noise and she was bemused by it. She certainly wasn't pinned to the floor by sonic vibrations. Obviously, other people around that time recorded these sounds. One of the persons was Roger Rump, who was the town's then postmaster, who actually said that all 5,000 tiles on the roof of his house had been lifted and put back into place. And the reason why I knew there were 5,000 tiles, he had just had the roof completely retiled. So again, these noises were reported, they continued right the way through until around May of 1965, when the actual then manifestations of the visual object started to appear in the skies around the town. And of course, the good burghers of Warminster knew a good thing when they saw it. There was obviously a lot of media interest in the town, and as you can see, the one clipping there says the cash tills started ringing, which is quite understandable. Now, in 1965, the public concern was so much that an extraordinary meeting was called by the council in the town hall on the August bank holiday weekend, hence us being here today. It is the closest that we can get to a proper 50th anniversary, simply because I don't think any of you would like to have come out here on Christmas Day last year to an event. So we thought that possibly with the Skywatch tonight, which some of you may go to, you may well want, it would be a good idea to have the event today rather than on Christmas Day. Okay, I'll have to turn the microphone around slightly. There we go. Right, how many of you actually been up to Cradle Hill? Ooh, a lot. Right, okay. So you obviously will recognise this skyline here. You have the West Wiltshire Golf Club, Elm Hill and Cobb Heath. Now this photograph here was taken around 1967, and again, I know your arms will probably get very tired by the time I finish this. How many of you have been up there recently? Right, so it's changed quite a lot. Right, so now, just in time for the town hall meeting, a young factory worker in the town by the name of Gordon Faulkner took what is now known to be the iconic image of the Warminster Thing. And obviously it graced the cover of Shuttlewood's first book, The Warminster Mystery. It's interesting to note that the Warminster Mystery's working title was The Warminster Sightings, not The Warminster Mystery. So someone, possibly from Neville Spearman, actually changed the title halfway through to make it a little more racy and punchy. Now there is Gordon Faulkner. In fact, funnily enough, The Sun ran an article on last Monday about Warminster, and there was a much better quality photograph, which I'd never actually seen, of Gordon Faulkner, so obviously somebody at least had done their research correctly. Now, the main photograph is a digital recreation of what the original Faulkner photograph may well have looked like. If I go back, you can actually see that on the enlargement, every grain of the silver halide on the negative is visible. So it shows just exactly how far that photograph had been blown up. Arthur himself became a convert after seeing something in the skies himself, and obviously amassed a huge number of reports as regarding the Warminster Thing. Warnings from Flying Friends was his second book, which was privately published, and UFO's Keys to the New Age followed around 1970. Arthur became quite a celebrity in the area for his beliefs and also for his reporting of the thing. Anyone who came into the town was directed to Arthur, and he obviously then, if he could, took them up to the hill to try and share the experiences with people. Arthur also had two other people with him in his key skywatching group at the time, Sybil Champion and Bob Strong. Bob Strong was the photographer of the group, and some of his photographs are even, should we say, a little bit suspect. This one I would like to explain a little bit about. I, many years ago, used to do photography in the pre-digital days, I hasten to add. Now, how many of you have ever developed your own film? Right, okay. How many of you have ever had what's known as a negative kink? No? A negative kink. Yeah. Well, basically what happens with a negative kink is you're loading the film into the carousel that goes into the drum that holds the chemicals. If you just pinch it slightly, you get that type of effect. So, although at the time when I was a young, very green-eyed researcher, believer, I thought that is a genuine photograph. Sadly, it isn't. I've actually done that myself on a number of occasions on some photographs which I wish I hadn't have done it on. It's quite annoying. Warminster also had, as far as I'm aware, the first recorded crop circles in modern history, and this was around 1965 to 1967. These are what Arthur described as UFO landing nests. No, I know they're not crop circles, but again, they are crop disturbances, for want of a better word. Now, again, a lot of you put your hands up, you've been up to Cradle Hill. As you can see, there is a map of how to find it. It hasn't changed. The map doesn't need updating that much, but as I said earlier on, Cradle Hill has changed a little bit over the years. Warminster, again, embraced the phenomenon to a degree, because again, the townspeople were doing quite well out of it, thank you very much. Hotels, guest houses, campsites, restaurants, etc. And, I believe that the phenomenon was self-sustaining, because people would come down to Warminster, people would see something, they would go back and tell their friends, and their friends would come down, they'd see something, they'd go and tell other friends, so the whole thing just kept going on. And Arthur, as well, obviously, was championing the cause all the time. So much so that Britain's premier magazine at the time, Flying Saucer Review, featured a sighting in Warminster, which was actually a hoax perpetrated by a guy called David Simpson. David claims that the hoax was done as a social cultural experiment to see how people could react to sightings and how they would describe them and then compare them to what was actually seen. It's still a slightly controversial subject to this day. Now, the bottom picture there will show you the sort of thing that was being seen around Warminster at that time. Arthur actually coined the expression amber gambler. And as any of you are drinkers, you may well have noticed there is a special brew that is actually available for sale today called the Amber Gambler, along with the Warminster Thing. The badges at the top, they were produced, we think, by a guy called Ken Rogers, who I'll come to in a few minutes. Again, I suppose this is the equivalent of the Kiss Me Quick hat for Warminster for a seaside town. And here we have Ken Rogers. Ken Rogers came to the town about 1970 to settle here. He actually set up the Warminster UFO newsletter and I believe the Warminster UFO group. It ran for about 3 years and was moderately successful. Ken later then published a book, of which you'll see a picture of it in a little bit. And then in 1975, a gentleman at the, well, I'm going to say there's a gentleman in the room, I'm not going to say where he is, because everybody will look at him and he'll get very embarrassed. A gentleman by the name of Peter Paget opened up the Star House just off Portway in Warminster. And this is where I come into the story. This is where my personal story starts. Peter and his team, which included at the time Arthur Shuttlewood, began to produce a magazine, the Fountain Journal. It ran to 11 issues before both the magazine and the Fountain Centre closed. That is the view of Cradle Hill as I would always like to remember it, with the white gates as they were known. The copse is there at the top and the track leading down. Basically all that has now gone. The hawthorn tree, which had, by the time it was removed, had actually grown right the way over towards the gate. This whole complex now has gone, and you can actually park your car beyond the area of the white gates, which came as a bit of a culture shock to me, because in those old days, you were always told, don't go beyond the white gates, you'll get taken by the army. Right, Cradle Hill Barn. Now I've no idea who those two good-looking chaps are down on the bottom right-hand photograph. We went up in October of 1976. Now at that time, technology was quite primitive, and all we had were cassette recorders, and we took them up to make audio diaries of the area. Up there we recorded on the tape players these mysterious clicking sounds, almost like a Geiger counter, which we couldn't hear at the time. So the following day we took up another tape recorder, fresh set of batteries, fresh tape, and exactly the same sounds were recorded again. So we went up for a third time, and this time we decided to try and make some controlled recordings. Now, here you can see on the top right, it's sadly no longer there, it's the grain tunnel that went under the barn. So we climbed, clambered, whatever you want to do, into that space, lay very quietly for a few minutes, and waited with the tape recorders running. We still got the sounds, and we also got what appeared to be a heartbeat. Now, one skeptic a while back said to me it was electromagnetic interference. A couple of things that really sort of spring to mind that I can counter with here. One, that is about 3 feet underground and you are surrounded by solid concrete. Two, there is no electrical equipment at that time up in the barn. The nearest power supply would either have been at the West Wiltshire Golf Club or at one of the guard posts. And thirdly, if it was some form of microwave radiation, I don't think I'd be standing here talking to you today. So again, you can make up your own minds of what it was we recorded, because to this day, we still don't know. And sadly, over the years, the tapes were lost, because I would love to play them here. So as the 1970s moved on, the phenomenon was still being seen, people were still coming to the town. By this time, in 1976, Arthur Shuttlewood's health had begun to fail, so he began to visit the hill less and less, but he was still amassing reports of sightings in the area and still writing books. These, 1, 2, 3, are the final 3 in the Warminster set, the second trilogy. Warminster Flying from Friends was released in 1976. More UFOs over Warminster, I think, in 1979, and UFO Magic in Motion in 1980. As I mentioned earlier, the Fountain Centre, Star House, closed, Then another group set up in the town by the name of UFO Info. They basically took the mantle on from the Fountain Centre and carried on for a couple of years until they too, and I believe it was down to, shall we say, interpersonal conflicts within the group, forced that group to close. And then, as far as I'm aware, that was the last UFO group that were actively involved in Warminster. So we are talking around 1978 to 1979, which then again does tie into the fact that the phenomenon itself died off in the 1980s. Yes, I'm glad we have got any children in. That photograph at the bottom is Cradle Hill Cops. Apparently it's quite a famous photograph. It's almost as famous as, some of you might remember, the tennis player scratching her backside. There is Arthur, later on in his life, hopefully relaxing. And then of course, about 1977, another reason why Warminster died was the double enigma, the Welsh Triangle. Suddenly, another UFO hotspot burst upon the scene. A lot of interest was then diverted away from Warminster down to South Wales. The South Wales flap did not last half as long as the Warminster one, a couple of years possibly, if that. But it was enough to basically sideline Warminster, and it was the start of the decline of the mystery. Peter Paget wrote 2 books, The Welsh Triangle and UFO UK. UFO UK was probably, a lot of material was culled from articles and pieces from the now defunct Fountain Journal. Ken Rogers himself sadly died in, I believe it was 1993, and his book, The Warminster Triangle, was published after his death. I do believe it is still available, possibly from Coates and Parker in the town, but the sad thing is that we found that the binding is a little bit suspect, so it does tend to fall apart after one reading. But it is worth reading. It's definitely one of those books that if you are a Warminster nut, then it's one of the books that you should have in your library. Arthur sadly died in 1996. And with that, the last lingering remains of the Warminster phenomenon. The last champion had gone, the last original champion, should I say. And by the mid-1990s, the Warminster mystery was all but forgotten. I mean, I don't know if any of you ever got a part work called The Unexplained? Yeah? There was one mention of Warminster in the whole thing, as far as I remember, and that was written by Jenny Randles. So for a major flap, for a major UFO hotspot, it was basically then just a footnote in a lot of books, sadly. Yeah, but was it forgotten? Obviously not, because we're here. Right, for me, fate took a hand. I'm not going to go into the full story because it's long and involved, but I decided to write down what happened to me in Warminster as a kind of therapy. I met Steve Dewey, the co-author of Alien in Heat, completely by accident in Warminster in 1976. Immediately liked the guy. We had a bond, if you want to use that, but over the years, as you do, we lost contact. I started to do some internet research on Warminster and found a draft version of this book in Alien Heat. So I emailed Steve and said, oh yeah, I remember you. You were the green-eyed young skywatcher that I met in 1976. So we began collaborating on my own work, which you can see there was finally saw the light of day in 2006. But then I thought, how can you take this further forward? You know, I was getting a great deal of enjoyment about reminiscing about Warminster, about talking to it, because a lot of people are a lot more open-minded these days, and I call it the post-X-Files syndrome. That in the 1970s, if you just stick your head above the wall and go, hello, I'm into UFOs, you got laughed at, you know, you go away. These days now, it's amazing. You know, people say to me, oh, what's your hobby? I say, Warminster, UFOs. Oh, really? A lot of people are prepared to embrace the subject now, which I find fantastic. So, I thought, how can you take this forward? Yeah, late. Have you got a note? How can I take it forward? And I thought, well, I haven't been sky watching in years. So, via the magic of the internet, we decided to hold an anniversary skywatch on the August bank holiday. And my God, I was staggered. There were about 50 people up there. And this is just through the power of the internet. People were coming from Northumberland, they were coming from the Lake District, they were coming from London, Cornwall, just to be on that hill again. Now, you've got as much chance of seeing a UFO in Warminster these days as you have over probably your hometowns or any town in the country. But the nice thing about it is, it's a community atmosphere. You go up there, you talk, you look at the sky, you reminisce. And I must admit, it's always a very, very enjoyable evening. And it's on tonight, weather permitting. Right, Warminster, as I say, will not be forgotten. That's Star House on the top left-hand picture, a bunch of miscreants in the middle picture. The picture there with the beep, that is some graffiti on Cradle Hill Bar. That is a Scottish group by the name of CE4, who some of you may have heard their music. They've recorded 2 songs specifically about Warminster, Warminster Nights and Come Touch the Sky. Obviously, in 2009 and 2010, we had the Warminster Weird events, of which I was involved with, and after the experience of that, I swore never again. And here I am 5 years later doing the same thing. Sky watches on the hill, my good friends Mike Ora and John Hanson there, and of course the now infamous mural that is now painted on the wall of the town central car park, which was secretly done by the people from the Tourist Information Centre as a closing goodbye to commemorate 50 years of the Warminster phenomenon. And sadly, that is really about the only thing the town has done for this celebration. Such is the power of Warminster, I even recorded an edition of Flog It. Yes, my thoughts exactly. However, I have got to say that the presenter, Paul Martin, was very open-minded and he was genuinely interested, which is probably the most important thing. And if ever you do catch it, yeah, it shows through. There is definitely a certain amount of affection taken for it. It's a bit like going back to that Sun article that I mentioned earlier on, from earlier this week. I was contacted by the reporter. I spent 45 minutes on the phone talking to her about the event, talking to her about Warminster, pointing in the right direction for various websites, and then I got an email on the Sunday night saying it's going to be in the paper on Monday morning, and I was dreading it, because we all know what the Sun's like. Yeah. They did a damn good job, apart from one thing. How many of you actually read that article? 1, 2, 3. Right, so did you notice the rather crass error in it?
Which one?
Oh, well, for me, the big crass error.
Date?
No, the date of the event. You were supposed to be here yesterday. But they have apologised profusely, and I think I can let this little tiny secret out of the bag now. The Sun is actually donating £200 to help the heroes on behalf of the event. So I think they feel a little bit guilty about it. Right, before we finish, tonight's Skywatch. If some of you want to go up there, so do's and don'ts. Please, first of all, park as carefully and as sensibly as you can. There is quite a lot of car parking space up there now, if you're prepared to walk a few 100 yards. But bear in mind that it is army land still. The army still do patrol the area, and obviously the farmer will need access to fields if he's got sheep, cattle, or he's doing any form of work in the fields. Right, the countryside code, definitely no fires. Please, no barbecues. No lantern launching. And I kid you not, we have had people up there who have launched lanterns and they thought it was fun. No, it wasn't. Please take any litter away with you. And if any of you have not been up to Cradle Hill before, and by the looks of it, those of you who may be going up probably have, first of all, get there early if you haven't been up there before, because the important thing is that you have to know the layout of the land. because a car headlight coming over Lord's Hill in the distance has often confused, shall we say, newbies into thinking they're seeing something when they're not. The land itself, as I explained earlier on, the area of the White Gates is now open to the public, but obviously a lot of the land that is bordering the hill is now still Army land. I recorded a programme for the BBC, for Channel 4, called Britain's Closest Encounters a few years ago. And all I'll say is that there were 3 members of the film crew, unlike the BBC that had about 50. And they said, oh, we'll film you here. And I said, we can't go there. I said, no, we'll be all right, we'll film you there. I said, we can't go there. Look, don't worry, it's okay, we're a film crew. So we basically sort of went on slightly onto the cusp of Army land. Next minute, Range Rover turns up. And I look round, and all I can see were these dots in the distance. Film crew had legged it, leaving me to defuse the situation. Yeah, it seems to be the story of my life these days. Right, please wear sensible shoes and clothing if you go up. It's going to be weather-wise, we don't know what the weather's going to do, but it does get very cold up that hill. I mean, the first year I went up was in 1976, if any of you can remember that far back. 1976 was a bloody hot summer, and it's the only time I've ever skywatched on Cradle Hill until 2 o'clock in the morning, and all I've needed is a t-shirt and a light pair of trousers. Apart from that, by 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, you are freezing. There was, a little story for you, there was actually a few years ago plans to close Cradle Hill off to the public. So I organised a protest skywatch in January, -12. That was cold. But the nice thing about it is the Army then relented, because I think they didn't like the adverse publicity of the Sun running a headline of British Army defeated by dog poo. Because Cradle Hill has now become very popular for dog walkers, and there is a lot of dog mess up there, and the Army were getting completely fed up of having laundry bills for uniforms that had been soiled by, shall we say, our 4-legged friends' calling cards. So what does the future hold? Nobody knows, sadly. Hopefully Warminster will still continue to be remembered. Mr. Hanson?
Sorry to interrupt, but is Lance Caldwell here?
Lance Caldwell?
No, he's gone.
He's gone.
Yeah.
Right, he came here, he spoke to us earlier, thought that actually the meeting was an hour, and not for the day.
Oh.
He was still here. He's actually cited.
Okay, we'll deal with that later for you, John.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm going to say that if he was still here, he could have just, you know.
Okay. Right, sorry about that, folks. Right, I'm always being heckled. Right, as I say, the future, what does it hold? We don't know. Nobody does. I mean, people have said to me, what's the answer to the UFO phenomenon? Well, if I knew that, I wouldn't be here now. I'd be Nick Pope, wouldn't I? I'd be an American. I'd make it big. I'd be driving around in a Rolls Royce, not a knackered Fiesta. Anyway, all I say to you is thank you for coming again. I'm sorry this has been a bit disjointed, but the last couple of days have been absolutely manic. I'm sure you appreciate I now need to lie down in a darkened room for about 4 hours. All I'll say is please keep the flame burning, and thank you again for coming. Thank you.